Sir, City Hall doesn't open until 8 a.m.
I'm Marcus Williams. I'm the incoming mayor. Today is my inauguration day.
Do you have an appointment? My mayor-elect identification, issued by the city clerk 3 weeks ago.
I can't verify this without calling the clerk's office.
The clerk's office opens at 8.
A man wins election to become the first black mayor in his city's 140-year history. 3 weeks later, on inauguration morning, he arrives early to walk the building quietly before the ceremony. He has his mayor-elect ID from the city clerk, his inauguration program with his photo on the cover, his law firm credentials, the city attorney's number in his phone, and his face on the front page of that morning's newspaper. The security guard takes his ID, examines it, hands it back, and doesn't move. This is Mayor-elect Marcus Williams, 52 years old, civil rights attorney for 12 years, city council member for 8 years, elected with 67% of the vote, about to become the first black mayor in Riverside City's 140-year history. His inauguration ceremony is at 2 p.m. in the building he cannot enter. In his briefcase, the speech he wrote over 3 weeks, his mother's Bible, which he'll use for the oath, the future of 340,000 people. Security guard Brandon Walsh missed the morning briefing where all guards were told the new mayor would arrive early. He stood face-to-face with Marcus Williams, took his credentials in his own hands, read them, and handed them back. Still didn't move. Supervisor Morrison arrived, looked Williams directly in the eyes, and made the same choice. Officer Dunn stepped between Williams and the door. Officer Holt held the morning newspaper next to Williams's face. Same photograph, same man. It still took 7 more minutes. This will cost $14.7 million. End careers across security and law enforcement, change state law, and prove that even on the morning you're about to become mayor, your race can make you a suspect at your own front door. Type, open the door. If a mayor-elect with official credentials shouldn't need a newspaper held next to his face to prove who he is on inauguration morning. 6:15 a.m., inauguration morning. Riverside City, population 340,000. A city that had existed for 140 years, been led by 19 mayors, and had never once elected a black man to its highest office. Until 3 weeks ago. Marcus Williams sat in his personal car outside City Hall for 5 minutes before getting out, just looking at the building. The historic limestone facade built in 1924, the bronze entrance doors, the flagpoles with the city and state flags hanging motionless in the early morning air. He'd looked at this building his whole life. As a child in his father's mail truck making South Side rounds, as a teenager watching council votes on the news, the ones that shaped his neighborhood from the outside, as a civil rights attorney filing briefs that sometimes changed things and sometimes didn't, as a council member climbing these steps for 8 years of sessions, always approaching this building as someone trying to influence what happened inside it. Today, he would walk in as the man who ran it. He was wearing his inauguration suit, deep charcoal gray, perfectly fitted, selected with his wife Patricia over 3 shopping trips until it was exactly right. American flag pin on his lapel. In his briefcase, the speech he'd rewritten 11 times over 3 weeks. His mother's Bible, 78 years old and worn at the spine, which he'd carried to church every Sunday of his childhood and which he would use for the oath at 2 p.m. And the inauguration program, printed the day before, his name and photograph on the cover above the words, Riverside City's 20th Mayor. He got out of his personal car. The official mayoral vehicle would be formally assigned at the ceremony. No security detail yet. That came with the oath. No advance staff. They were arriving at 8 a.m. Just Marcus Williams walking toward the building he was about to lead, wanting 1 quiet hour inside it before the day consumed everything. Apex Security Solutions had held the City Hall contract for 3 years under the previous administration. The previous mayor, White, 68, had been known to all security personally. He called ahead. Official vehicle, advanced staff. His rhythms of arrival were established and familiar. Nobody had designed a protocol for what a mayoral transition actually looked like on the first morning. Nobody had asked what happens when a new mayor arrives without the established signals of incumbency. The 7 a.m. shift briefing had covered it. Supervisor David Park had stood before the full morning crew and said clearly, "New mayor arrives today, Marcus Williams, inauguration at 2 p.m., full access if he comes early, here is his photograph. Every guard present acknowledged." Brandon Walsh had not been present. Coming off overnight shift, he'd been away from the briefing room during the 3-minute window it occurred. His relief supervisor assumed someone else had informed him. Nobody had. Walsh was 26, 8 months with Apex Security, previously worked retail security, 3 days of basic training, 0 hours of diversity instruction, de-escalation certification, or implicit bias training, all of which Apex Security was contractually required to provide before deploying guards to City Hall. They had submitted signed compliance certifications to the city claiming otherwise. Every certification was false. At 6:20 a.m., Walsh was posted at the exterior entrance, standard early morning protocol, standing at the door rather than behind it. The bronze doors of City Hall at his back. The limestone steps in front of him, the empty downtown street beyond. He saw a black man in a suit walking toward him from the visitor parking section. No official vehicle, no advance staff, no radio contact from inside announcing an arrival. Just a man in a suit carrying a briefcase walking toward City Hall at 6:20 in the morning. The man reached the bottom of the steps. "Good morning. I'm Marcus Williams. I'm the incoming mayor. Today is my inauguration day. I'd like to come in." Walsh looked at him, made an assessment in the fraction of a second before conscious thought, processed the suit, the briefcase, the time, the absence of official signals, the face of the man in front of him. "Do you have an appointment?" Marcus Williams had been a civil rights attorney for 12 years. He recognized the question for what it was immediately, but he was here for a reason, a personal reason, an hour alone in the building before history happened in it. "I have my mayor-elect identification from the city clerk's office." He held it out. Walsh took it. Walsh held the mayor-elect ID in his own hands. Official card from the city clerk's office, photograph of Marcus Williams, his name in full. "Mayor-elect, City of Riverside," printed in official city font beneath the municipal seal. He read it, looked up at Williams, looked back at the card, handed it back, didn't move. "I can't verify this without calling the clerk's office." Williams looked at his credential being returned to him, looked at the door still blocked, looked at Walsh. "You examined my credentials and you're still not letting me in." "Sir, I can't verify without official confirmation." "The clerk's office opens at 8 a.m. "Then you'll need to wait, sir." Williams opened his briefcase, pulled out the inauguration program, his photograph on the cover. His name above Riverside City's 20th mayor, handed it to Walsh directly. Walsh looked at the program, looked at the photograph, looked at Williams standing in front of him, handed the program back, didn't move. "Sir, these can be printed by anyone. You're holding the city's official inaugural program. My photograph is on the cover. I'm standing in front of you. Are you telling me I don't look like myself?" Walsh called his overnight supervisor Torres, who had also missed the briefing and who, over the phone, made the same decision Walsh had made in person. "Don't let him in until official verification." Supervisor Morrison arrived at 6:27 a.m. Morrison, 34 years old, 4 prior complaints from other clients about his treatment of Black and Latino visitors to secured facilities, all internally dismissed without investigation. He walked to where Walsh was standing, looked Marcus Williams directly in the eyes, eye to eye, no glass between them, no camera filter, direct human contact. "Sir, we can't grant access without verification through our system. I am handing you official credentials identifying me as the incoming mayor of this city. Anyone can have cards printed." "Do I look like I'm lying to you?" Morrison held the eye contact. Williams held it back. The question sat between them. Morrison looked away first. "Sir, this is policy." Williams pulled out his phone. "I have the city attorney's number. He can confirm my identity in 30 seconds. We verify through our own channels, sir. Your channels require the clerk's office, which opens at 8 a.m., which is 90 minutes from now on the morning of my inauguration. Sir, I'd ask you to step back from the entrance." Williams didn't step back. He stood exactly where he was, on the steps of his building, in his inauguration suit, his mother's Bible in the briefcase beside him. I'm not going to step back from the entrance of my own building. Morrison called 911 at 6:30 a.m. We have an individual at City Hall claiming to be the mayor-elect, unable to verify credentials, requesting officer presence. Williams heard the call. 12 years as a civil rights attorney, 3 of them specializing in exactly this kind of encounter. He knew what the call meant, knew what was coming, knew how this part worked. He straightened his jacket, checked the flag pin on his lapel, set his briefcase down on the step beside him, waited with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to be calm in rooms that had already decided to be hostile. Resident Maria Santos was walking past on her morning route when she noticed the situation developing. She recognized Williams immediately from the election coverage. She pulled out her phone and started recording without saying anything, understanding instinctively that the moment needed documentation. Press photographer James Liu, arriving early to shoot the building for an Inauguration Day feature, saw the confrontation from across the street and began photographing. His lens caught Walsh and Morrison standing in the doorway, Williams on the step below them, briefcase beside him, suit immaculate, expression controlled. Officers Patricia Dunn and James Holt arrived at 6:36 a.m. Dunn got out first, took in the scene, black man in a suit on the City Hall steps, 2 security guards in the doorway. Early morning, no other officials present. Dunn approached Williams. "Sir, what's the situation?" "Good morning, officer. I'm Marcus Williams. I was elected mayor of this city 3 weeks ago with 67% of the vote. My inauguration ceremony is at 2 p.m. in this building. I arrived at 6:20 a.m. for some personal time before the day's events, and the security personnel have declined to verify my credentials despite examining them directly." "Do you have ID?" Williams presented everything: mayor-elect ID, state driver's license, inauguration program, law firm business card, city attorney's number on his phone, screen visible, offered for immediate verification. Dunn examined the mayor-elect ID. "Sir, this says mayor-elect. You're not technically the mayor until 2 p.m. "That's correct, and I'd like to enter the building where that ceremony is being held." "Sir, security has authority to restrict entry before business hours." "Officer, what verification would help you? I have the city attorney, the police chief, my chief of staff, and my council liaison all reachable right now. Which would be most useful?" Dunn looked at Morrison. Morrison gave a small nod that meant, "We don't know who this is. Cover us." Dunn stepped between Williams and the door, physically, completing the blockade. Holt had not moved from the patrol car. Something had been working at him since they pulled up. He looked at the man on the steps, the suit, the bearing, the controlled expression of someone who knew exactly what was happening to him. Holt reached back into the patrol car. The morning Riverside City Gazette was on the passenger seat where he'd tossed it after buying coffee. Front page, below the fold but large, a man at a podium with confetti falling and a crowd behind him. Headline, "History Made. Williams wins, Riverside's first black mayor." Holt looked at the photograph, looked at the man on the steps. Same face, same man. Exactly. He walked to where Walsh and Dunn were standing in the doorway. Held the newspaper up next to Williams's face without saying a word. Walsh on the left. The newspaper photograph in the middle. Williams's face on the right. No one spoke for 3 seconds. Patricia. Just her name, nothing else needed. Dunn looked at the newspaper, looked at Williams. The moment stretched beyond what procedure could cover. Chief of Staff Diane Foster's car appeared at the end of the block, moving fast. Councilmember Patricia Johnson was 30 seconds behind her, having received Foster's emergency text from across town. Foster reached the steps first, breathless, still in the clothes she'd thrown on when Williams called. "Mayor-elect Williams, I'm so sorry." She turned to Dunn. "I'm Diane Foster, his chief of staff. That is my mayor. This ends now." Morrison through the doorway. "Ma'am, we'd need to verify." Holt was already done. He stepped to the door, moved Walsh physically aside with one hand, and held it open. The 7 a.m. shift supervisor, David Park, pulled up at that moment, saw the scene, understood in 3 seconds what had happened, and ran up the steps past everyone directly to Williams. "Mayor-elect Williams, I briefed the morning crew. I should have personally confirmed the overnight guard was informed. This is my failure, and I am deeply sorry. Please come in." Williams looked at Walsh, at Morrison, at Dunn, at Holt, still holding the newspaper, at Liu's camera across the street, at Santos's phone pointed at the entrance, at the covered portrait visible through the glass doors, waiting for 2 p.m. His portrait, already inside, already true, invisible under its cloth. He picked up his briefcase, walked through the door at 6:44 a.m., 24 minutes after his first attempt, on inauguration morning, with his mother's Bible in his hand. Inside, Park continued apologizing. Williams held up one hand quietly. "Mr. Park, was there a briefing this morning?" "Yes, sir. I conducted it myself." "Walsh wasn't present?" "He missed it, sir. And no one confirmed he'd been told individually?" Park looked at the floor. "No, sir." Williams nodded slowly, walked to the covered portrait, stood before it, touched the cloth, his own face underneath, waiting. This is a system failure before it's an individual failure. I want to understand that distinction clearly when we address it. He picked up his briefcase, pressed the elevator button. "Please ensure everyone on duty today has been personally briefed." The doors opened. He stepped in. As they closed, the lobby was silent except for Park already on his phone, and the soft weight of 24 minutes settling into the record of a morning that was supposed to be only about one thing. Marcus Williams had wanted to change Riverside City since he was 15 years old and watched a council vote defund the library in his neighborhood to repave roads in a wealthier district 4 miles away. His father carried mail through this city for 32 years. His mother taught 3rd grade for 29. Same school, same classroom, same block. They raised Marcus in the South Side, a neighborhood that decisions were made about rather than with. Good people in a place that power hadn't bothered to look at carefully in a very long time. Harvard felt like arriving somewhere he'd always been headed, but never been permitted to see. Law school felt like acquiring the language that people who made decisions already spoke. When he passed the bar, he didn't take the offer from the downtown firm. He went home. 3 blocks from where he grew up, civil rights practice, 12 years, police misconduct, employment discrimination. Housing violations, wrongful evictions, cases larger firms called unwinnable. He won more than he lost. City council happened because the seat in his district opened, and his neighbors said his name before he'd considered it himself. 8 years representing the South Side. 12 years of courtroom instinct translated into chamber strategy. Learning how a city actually moves beneath its official structures. The mayor's race took 2 years of preparation. People said a black man from the South Side couldn't win citywide. He'd heard that sentence his entire life in different forms. He'd learned to hear it as information about the speaker. He won with 67% of the vote, largest victory margin in 40 years. His mother cried for 30 minutes and then made everyone in the room sing a hymn. On inauguration morning, he'd wanted one thing before the ceremony: an hour alone in the building, walking the hallways, sitting in the office that would be his. The kind of quiet personal reckoning that doesn't happen after the oath, when the machinery of office and press and expectation surrounds everything. Instead, he stood on the steps for 24 minutes, his mother's Bible in his briefcase, his inauguration speech in his hand, and the ordinary American experience of being a black man in a suit asking to be believed, playing out on the most extraordinary morning of his life. He knew it while it was happening. Knew it with the clarity that 12 years of civil rights work provides. This was also part of the story now, woven into the day, whether he'd chosen it or not. By 7:30 a.m., the city was already awake to what had happened. Santos's phone video had been shared 4,000 times before she reached the end of her walking route. Liu's photographs ran in the Gazette's digital edition before 7 a.m., alongside the Inauguration Day coverage they had originally been assigned to accompany. The image that defined everything was Liu's. Walsh and Morrison standing in the doorway, Williams on the step below them, briefcase at his feet, expression controlled and clear, and visible through the glass doors behind them, the faint outline of a cloth-covered portrait on an easel in the lobby. The police chief called at 7:45 a.m. Williams was already in the 6th floor office, the one with his name on the door, the one he'd never entered before this morning. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus, I've seen the footage. I'm horrified. I'm launching an immediate review of Officer Dunn's conduct." Raymond, I want to talk about what this reveals about systems before we address individuals. Come see me after the ceremony. The City Council President convened an emergency session at 11 a.m., 3 hours before the inauguration. The session was brief. Liu's photographs were displayed. Santos's video played in the chamber. Officer Holt's incident report, filed 2 hours after the confrontation in complete voluntary detail, was read into the record. Deputy Mayor Chen testified about receiving the call. Councilmember Johnson testified about arriving on scene. The vote was 9-0. Apex Security Solutions contract terminated immediately and permanently. The council president read the resolution. This city does not employ companies whose personnel cannot recognize its own mayor on his inauguration morning. This contract is terminated effective immediately. At 1 p.m., Williams met with senior staff in the 6th floor conference room. They expected anger. He was precise. What happened this morning has 2 stories. The individual story is about bias and what people see when they look at a black man in a suit on the steps of a government building. That story is real, and we will address it completely. The systemic story is about a briefing that happened and wasn't confirmed, a security company that violated its training contract, and a transition protocol that didn't account for what the first morning of a new administration actually looks like. We address both, separately, completely. The inauguration ceremony proceeded at 2 p.m. Marcus Williams took the oath on his mother's Bible. The portrait was unveiled in the lobby to sustained applause. It hung now where it would remain for the duration of his service, in the space where it would have answered every question that morning, visible to everyone who entered the building he led. Within 48 hours, both the State Attorney General and the FBI Civil Rights Division had opened investigations, triggered not just by the incident, but by Apex Security's pattern across all its municipal contracts, with investigators quickly uncovering a compliance fraud operation that had been running beneath the discrimination complaints for 2 years. City Hall's 24 cameras had recorded everything with clear timestamps, but the most powerful evidence was what the cameras hadn't needed to capture, because witnesses had documented it themselves. Santos's phone video showing Walsh taking Williams's credentials directly from his hand, reading them and returning them without moving. Liu's photographs documenting the physical blockade of Morrison and Walsh in the doorway, and Holt's body camera capturing his newspaper identification and Dunn's response. The moment Walsh handed the credentials back became the center of the case, with use of force and civil rights experts describing it as the clearest possible documentation of deliberate denial, distinguishing it from cases where officers or security personnel claimed inadequate information, because Walsh had held the information in his hands, processed it visually, and chosen not to act on it. Apex Security's personnel records revealed Walsh had received 3 days of basic training against the contractual requirement of 40 hours, 0 diversity or bias training against the contractual requirement, and no de-escalation certification, all while Apex had submitted signed compliance certifications to the city claiming otherwise, creating criminal fraud exposure that expanded the case from civil rights violation to federal prosecution. The false certifications connected 7 municipal clients who had paid for training that was never provided, with investigators finding that Apex had submitted identical fraudulent documents to each, creating a pattern of institutional fraud that the FBI described in their report as systematic and deliberate, language that made the company's eventual criminal liability inevitable alongside its civil exposure. Morrison's 4 prior complaints, all involving Black or Latino individuals, denied access to secured facilities despite legitimate credentials, were reopened and found meritorious by state investigators, with all 4 original complainants receiving separate settlements and Morrison's pattern of conduct becoming central evidence of Apex's institutional practice rather than isolated employee behavior. Officer Dunn's 2 prior complaints, both involving Black individuals whose credentials were questioned despite corroborating evidence, were investigated and found meritorious, establishing a pattern that predated inauguration morning and that Internal Affairs had twice failed to address, creating institutional liability for the police department alongside Apex's corporate liability. Officer Holt's voluntary incident report, filed within 2 hours, described in precise detail his recognition of Williams from the newspaper, his attempts to redirect Dunn from the moment they arrived, and his eventual physical intervention to open the door, providing the prosecution with a law enforcement witness whose credibility was unimpeachable because he had documented everything himself before anyone asked him to. Within 6 months, the investigation had produced evidence so comprehensive that Apex's attorneys privately acknowledged the case was unwinnable from every angle simultaneously, recommending settlement as the only option that preserved any possibility of limiting criminal exposure for company leadership. 12 weeks after inauguration, morning the lawsuit was filed. Williams versus Apex Security Solutions, Supervisor Keith Morrison, Guard Brandon Walsh, Officer Patricia Dunn, and the City of Riverside Police Department. Claims included false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, racial discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent hiring and training, pattern and practice discrimination, and fraudulent compliance certification. 2 photographs ran side by side throughout the trial. Liu's front steps image. Walsh and Morrison in the doorway, Williams below them, covered portrait visible through the glass behind, and the Gazette front page from 3 weeks earlier. Williams at his victory podium, confetti falling, the same face, the same man, the image Holt had held next to his face on inauguration morning. Municipal law expert Professor David Richardson of Georgetown testified, Mayor-elect Williams presented every available form of identification: official credentials from the city clerk, government photo ID, his photograph on the published inauguration program, 2 senior officials confirming identity in person, a newspaper front page. At no point was standard verification protocol followed, which would have resolved this in minutes. What was followed instead was an assumption that a black man without an official vehicle and advanced staff couldn't be who he said he was. An assumption that persisted through direct examination of his credentials, through multiple witness confirmations, and through a newspaper photograph held directly next to his face. Former Secret Service Director Michael Barnes testified, Walsh held the credentials in his hands, read them, returned them. That is not a failure of information. That is a rejection of information. There is a meaningful legal and ethical difference between those two things. Walsh had everything he needed to open the door. He chose not to. That choice, made in direct physical contact with Mayor-elect Williams and his credentials, is not a procedural error. It is a deliberate decision. The cross-examination of Walsh produced the exchange that defined the trial. Mr. Walsh, you took Mayor-elect Williams's ID from his hand? Yes. You read it? Yes. You saw his name, his photograph, and the words, Mayor-elect, City of Riverside? Yes. You handed it back? Yes. And you still didn't open the door? I couldn't verify. You had verified. You held verification in your hands. What you couldn't do was accept it. Why? Walsh had no answer. When Officer Holt held the morning newspaper next to Mayor-elect Williams's face, the same photograph that was in every paper in the state that morning, was there any remaining doubt about who you were looking at? Walsh looked at the table. No. And you still waited 7 more minutes? Silence. Cross-examination of Morrison produced its own defining moment. Mr. Morrison, you looked Mayor-elect Williams directly in the eyes? Yes. He asked you, do I look like I'm lying to you? Do you remember that? Yes. Did he look like he was lying? Morrison's attorney objected. The judge overruled. No. Did you open the door? No. You looked a man in the eyes, determined he wasn't lying, and still blocked his entry? Morrison stared at his hands. The jury deliberated 4 hours, liable on all counts. 14 months after inauguration morning, settlement reached. $14.7 million, $4.7 million to Mayor Williams for false imprisonment, civil rights violations, emotional distress, and the deliberate corruption of a historic occasion. $6 million in punitive damages against Apex Security Solutions for pattern discrimination, contract fraud, and deployment of untrained personnel in violation of certified compliance agreements. $4 million against the city police department for Officer Dunn's conduct and institutional failure to address her documented complaint pattern. Walsh, terminated from Apex Security, cannot work in licensed security in the state, required 200 hours community service. In a statement released through his attorney, I held his credentials in my hands. I read them. I handed them back and didn't move. I've asked myself every day since, why? The honest answer is that I'd already decided before I read anything. That's what I have to own. Morrison, terminated from Apex Security, cannot work in licensed security in the state, personally liable $50,000, all 4 prior complaints found meritorious, all 4 complainants settled separately. Dunn, terminated from the police force, cannot work in law enforcement in the state, personally liable $75,000, prior complaints investigated and found meritorious. Holt, commended publicly by the mayor, promoted to the training division. The newspaper he held up that morning is framed on his office wall. The caption beneath it reads, "The evidence was already in my hands." Apex Security Solutions lost all 7 municipal contracts. CEO Robert Mitchell settled federal fraud charges. Company filed bankruptcy 16 months after settlement. Their name became a case study in municipal procurement training on how false compliance certification creates catastrophic liability. Systemic reforms followed. 80 hours mandatory implicit bias training for all police officers, new transition protocols requiring individual confirmation that every security guard has been briefed before any incoming official's first day, independent civilian oversight board with termination authority, annual third-party bias audits. State legislation, the Williams Act, requiring verified diversity and de-escalation training for all licensed security personnel, with criminal penalties for false compliance certification. Mayor Williams served his full first term and won re-election with 71% of the vote, used the settlement to establish the Open Doors Foundation, providing legal representation to individuals facing racial discrimination in civic and professional spaces. 340 cases in its first 2 years. He still arrives early. Security is now city employees, properly trained, people who know him by name and record. Every morning the portrait looks back from the lobby wall where it has hung since Inauguration afternoon. Same face as the covered portrait he touched that morning. Now visible, now permanent. Officer Holt runs the implicit bias training program. He shows Lou's photograph to every new recruit, Walsh and Morrison in the doorway, Williams on the step below, the covered portrait behind the glass. The answer to who this man was, Holt tells every class, was visible in that lobby before anyone asked the question. It was on the front page of the newspaper I was holding in my hands. It was on the credentials Walsh returned without acting on. Everything needed to open that door was already present. The door stayed closed anyway. That's what bias does. It doesn't need more information. It rejects the information it already has. Walsh manages a coffee shop now. He talks about that morning when asked. I held his credentials, read them, handed them back. I've thought about why 1,000 times. The honest answer is that I'd already made my decision before I read a word, and nothing he showed me was ever going to change a decision I didn't know I'd already made. That's the thing about bias. You don't feel yourself making the choice. You just find yourself defending it afterward. Morrison works in another city. Dunn moved out of state. The Apex CEO settled criminal fraud charges with fines and probation. The company became a cautionary case study used in procurement training nationwide. Now, here's what this story is actually about, and it extends far beyond one man and one morning. Walsh didn't need more evidence. He needed to be willing to accept the evidence he had. That distinction matters more than any policy or training program because it locates the problem accurately. The problem wasn't that Walsh lacked information. He held the information in his hands and gave it back. The problem was that his prior conclusion was stronger than the evidence in front of him, and he didn't know that a prior conclusion had already been reached. That's how bias operates at its most dangerous, not as a conscious decision. As a conclusion that arrives before the facts do, that processes incoming evidence not as information, but as material to confirm or dismiss based on what was already decided. Walsh looked at Williams and reached a conclusion in the fraction of a second before thought. Everything after that, the ID he examined, the program he returned, the newspaper held next to the man's face, was filtered through a conclusion that had already been filed. Here is your question. Not about Walsh, about you. When someone hands you evidence that contradicts your first impression, what do you do with it? Do you genuinely reevaluate, or do you hand it back the way Walsh handed back that credential and find a reason why it doesn't change anything? This happens in every institution. In hiring decisions, when a resume from an unexpected name goes to the bottom of the pile. In medical settings, when symptoms from certain patients are taken less seriously. In schools, when certain students' explanations are believed less readily. In every room where someone has to prove themselves to a standard that shifts depending on who they are. Marcus Williams had 67% of a city behind him, official credentials from the clerk's office, his face on the front page of the newspaper, and a portrait already hanging inside the building he couldn't enter. The prior conclusion was still stronger than all of it. He took the oath at 2 p.m. His mother held the Bible. The portrait was unveiled. The city got its mayor. But the 24 minutes happened first, and somewhere right now, someone without a portrait or a newspaper front page or a deputy mayor racing from home is standing in their own version of those steps, with credentials being examined and returned, and a door that stays closed anyway. The settlement was justice. The reforms help future officials. But what changes the 24 minutes isn't policy. It's the willingness to let evidence be stronger than the conclusion that arrived before it. Walsh had that choice. He had the credentials in his hands. He gave them back. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next story.